welcome to How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak.
So, just a quick editorial note before we get started on this episode of How I Got Here. Inevitably, there were some problems with my audio on this one, so something that we were unable to rectify when we got into post-production. So bear with us on that. You might just need to turn up your volume a little bit during some of my questions with our guest, Bobby Healy. Oh, by the way, it is Bobby Healy, so beware for some swear words or curse words, as they say in the US. Otherwise, enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to How I Got Here, Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly podcast about the innovators in travel and transportation. Today, we're joined by Bobby Healy. Bobby Healy joined the recently founded CarTrawler in 2005 as CTO. And for those of you who don't know, CarTrawler connects business and leisure customers and online travel retailers with 2,500 leading and independent car rental agents, coach transfers, rail networks, and chauffeur drive services. Prior to joining CarTrawler, Bobby founded Eland Technologies, which he actually sold to CETA, where he remained as CTO until 2005. And after CarTrawler, Bobby has founded Manna, a drone delivery service. So thank you for joining us, Bobby.
Delighted to be here, David. Thank you.
So we like to start all these interviews off the same exact way, which is to ask the same question of how you got here.
So I stumbled many times to arrive where I am. So first of all, I'm a programmer. I still writing code. Love it. And so obviously I'm a techie. So I've always, I started my journey writing code for Nintendo, writing video games. And writing video games is great fun. It's pushing the limits of hardware and software together. And, you know, the actual game I could care less about, but the technical journey and the learning and the accomplishment to build a game is really something. And I started that when I was 15 years old. Oh, by the way, I should say I'm an uneducated Irish man, best type. And anyway, wrote code, started a little video games company myself called Doodlebug Designs, wrote a bunch of games, really very successful games that made no money whatsoever. So success being Billboard top 3 in the US for, you know, a couple of big games, made no money. And I also like to make money. So I actually went to work for Amadeus after that when I was 20 years old in the south of France. And that was when Amadeus were but a puppy. There was, I think, 70 people in Sophia Antipolis when I went there. And it was great, you know, consultant's gig, writing code, Amadeus, and enjoying the life in the south of France, the Provençal lifestyle. Got used to that, but then got quite, I would say, bored with the pace. You know, as great a company as Amadeus are, amazing what they've accomplished, too slow for a young entrepreneurial type like me. I always wanted to do something better. I always wanted to build my own thing. So I founded a company in Mexico City, of all places, called VTI, which is a travel agency desktop solution. So it's basically a GDS replacement desktop for Latin America. That went really well. Forward wind 12 years, I sold that business to CETA. I had moved it back to Ireland at that stage, sold the business to CETA. It was 150 people at the time, but doing quite well. Post 9/11 even, it was still going well. Sold to CETA, spent 2 years with CETA as chief evangelist, which is where I learned how to bullshit the most. And I did really enjoy it, even though CETA is perceived as a, you know, not the most innovative of businesses. I was, you know, sold into and became the software part, so the innovation part. So I enjoyed that, and it was good lesson in life. And then CarTrawler had been founded, and I was looking for a new gig, and CarTrawler was just a website renting cars. It had its own physical cars with wheels, steering wheel, all those things, and it wasn't really much. But the founders had gotten a contract with a company called Holiday Autos, which, you know, gave them access to car rental content around Europe. they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't have any tech to monetize that. Didn't have a website even really. And they were looking for a tech guy. You know, the way everyone's looking for a tech guy to write an app for them. Well, that's what they thought I was. And so I went in there with a very simple strategy was, look, take this great content, which is car hire, which turns out a very wide margin product, which I couldn't believe actually the unit economics of car hire. And take at the time I had 20 of the world's largest airlines as my customers for Eland. So you take those customer relationships and a great product that I know that they all want, build a middleware for it, and a really nice thought leadership platform to get to the market, to influence and to create this whole concept of ancillary revenue, non-air ancillary revenue, which the layman sounds really boring, but it translates to very important revenue for airlines at the time. Grew CarTrawler, that's a long story, go on forever about that, but CarTrawler was very simply very successful because of the timing that we entered the market. It was the perfect timing, really nice, simple strategy, executed very well with a strong team. And that took us 14 years. And we went through a number of private equity investment, leverage buyouts, and nice things like that. And then I stepped, about 3 years ago, I had the idea for my current business, which is Manna, a drone delivery business, flying hamburgers at 80 kilometers per hour through the air, delivered by autonomous drones. And here we are. That too long? I waffle too much? Sorry.
No, that was unusually succinct of you, Bobby. Hi, it's Kevin here. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. I mean, there's lots of things to start off with there, but let's go right back. And I was struck by something that you said about, you know, you ended up here in the south of France with Amadeus, but it was too slow for you. Can you identify what was something that they could have done to speed things up that would have kept you there for a little bit longer?
Nothing. A big company cannot provide the direct connection between a person and the result that a small company can provide. And Amadeus are a great company. Even then, they were a great company. And they treat their people so well. And they've managed to get to, 2,000 engineers or something. And it's still a really good culture of getting things done and innovating. Just, you know, I'm not different, by the way. I'm just a small company guy. I'll always be a small company guy. I want to write the code. I want to sell that code to the customers. I want to have the strategy. I want to own it all. And no company of scale could do that. And first thing I did in Amadeus was they had a product called Pro DOS. This was back in the OS 2 PM days, and they had a DOS version of that, you know, text screen based. And I wrote this really cool window emulator. It made when you logged in, it made the screen bounce, you know, and flip over, which is very difficult to do on a PC with shitty hardware. And not something though that the consultants from Arthur Andersen would understand. And I got a rap on the knuckles for that, and the rest is history.
So what would that have bouncing screen? Who would have been the users for that then? Would that have been agents or what?
Oh yeah, so
was that just you just pissing about?
No, it's like, well, I mean, sometimes the consumer doesn't know what the consumer wants, right? And in this case, the logon screen is the most boring thing you could fucking imagine, right? It's on every screen, on every application you use. You tell me how many logon screens bounce? None. Amadeus would have been the first in the world for bouncing login screen. And it's their loss. It's their loss.
Yeah, indeed. What could have been, I suppose, is...
what can I say? The company is shit because of it.
Indeed, but you referenced your age at the time, Bobby. You said you were in your early 20s, I think.
I was 19.
19.
Yeah.
If you'd been, well, you must be...
I'm 20.
I guess
51 and a half.
Okay, so you're now 51 now. If you rolled up at Amadeus now as a 51-year-old, do you think you would be slightly more accepting of your perceived notion of their speed now? Was it a youthful vigor thing that you just didn't like, or was it you just, as you said just now, Bobby, your kind of entrepreneurial spirit?
You know, even then I was diplomatic about it. You know, I didn't throw my toys out of the pram, and I did what I was told. And you know, I would always try to push to make things better, and I solved some nice problems for them, cool stuff that actually they did want. but would I? No, I don't- I mean, even now, 51-year-old Bobby still looks now at an aircraft, and I write my own code to analyze, accelerometer data, and I try to say, well, why don't we go to, these props instead of those props? And
Yep.
no, like in my team, there's 26, 27 people in Manna now. I'm the one pushing on innovating, and it's full of young people. It's all bloody young people. No, it's a personality defect, I think.
Okay, David.
So, Bobby, I want to rewind a little bit to, as when you founded CarTrawler. You said something that I kind of had to chuckle at, was like you took these 20 airline relationships and just sold something to them. And I feel like it's never that easy, right? Like with airlines and getting them to do much of anything. So obviously you guys succeeded. I think, if I remember correctly, about 100 airline relationships. So clearly you persevered and made it happen. But I'm kind of curious, if you could tell us a little bit more about how you actually managed, I think, convince some of the most risk-averse partners out there, and probably the longest enterprise sales cycle to work with you.
Yeah, relationship, David. So first of all, we knew what we were doing in terms of technology. So we knew their systems better than they knew their systems. Because don't forget, our previous life, me and my tech team were building these very e-commerce websites and middlewares for airlines. So we knew their systems better than they did, and they understood that we knew that because we were good at I would say communicating that to them. So they felt safe on at least that we knew we were doing technically, and we weren't going to be underestimating, that we knew what a P&R was and like basic stuff like that. So that's part one. And then part two was, I always come back to the route for market for CarTrawler, and it suits a lot of businesses, not all, but the perfect route to market for business like CarTrawler was thought leadership. So what that means is, and you've seen it, and both of you have seen it, me on a stage talking about stuff, right? I'm an expert I did a TED talk on autonomous cars. I know nothing about autonomous cars. It's just being entertaining, being the technology evangelist. Look at me, I know what I'm talking about. I know what you should be doing next. And giving them ideas and reasons to want to talk to you. And that works really well. And then, so you have an open door to go in and talk to them about, okay, well, we know how to solve this problem, and here's what us solving this problem for you translates to. And so I never found that difficult. And from the day I started, which was August the 12th, 2005, we had our first airline signed in less than a year, and it was Lot Polish Airlines. And we were building the platform as we were selling the platform. And that's the nice thing about being a tech, like programmer founder, is that you can be selling while you're writing the code. And so long as you're able to deliver and you're in control of ultimately the level of ambition of version one, and that the customer's in sync with that and understands that they're the beta user, I think that's the way to build a product, because you're actually building it with the customer, and you're not just getting the perfect product out of it as a result, but so is the customer getting exactly what they want. And then from our previous business, we had understood that in order to satisfy the moods and whims of different enterprise customers that all have their own view about what's the right way to do things and, want an input into a product, we anticipated that ahead of time. And in every conversation we had with them and in everything we built, we either built flexibility into the product to, satisfy them all, or we control the conversation preemptively so that we were able to have one set of code for all customers. And actually, one of the things that no one ever believes, and it's absolutely true, is that code that we wrote 13, 14 years ago is still at the core of the CarTrawler middleware. We got it right the first time. We never had to rebuild it.
Well, we have something else in common then, Bobby, other than just both running ground platforms. Our first deal was also with Lot Polish Airlines, and we closed it in an elevator. And unfortunately, the head of ancillary revenue was drunk and didn't remember it the next morning. So I was at a conference, and we were thrilled to have Lot Polish, and then never remembered.
It's a national carrier. They were a great partner. They were a great partner, but they're a bit like the Irish, I suppose.
Yeah, well, there's a healthy amount of alcohol.
Say no more on that, just for all those Polish people in the audience.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, it's it's interesting what you said about controlling the conversation or building flexibility into the product, because I do think that I see all these big enterprise guys. I once, met the guys that do a lot of public transit ticketing, and they had 17 different systems for 17 different, public transit agencies, and they
Yeah,
hadn't thought
yeah.
about any sort of central redundancy. So, I mean, it's impressive that you have literally all of your original code at the core
Mm.
still going.
It's a very simple system, though, David. I mean, at the core of it, it's all Java, which makes it nice to keep things clean. But it was very simple design principles, and I always, this was my line: the disk light should never blink. That was the rule. The disk light shouldn't blink when we're running, right? And what that means is you need to have a direct connection between what the output is of, in our case, a messaging system, to the hardware. So if the disk light's blinking, it means that you're relying on disk, right? And if you're relying on disk, you've not designed the system properly if you're going to be a messaging middleware. So that, like, those very, very simple technical principles guided the way we designed the code. And like, it's not rocket science. It's at the heart of the CarTrawler system. It's very pure and simple, concise code base. And then you can layer stuff on top of that, functionality. So we would have a pricing system, a sort biasing system, all these different systems and connectors to user interfaces. But at the core of it, it was simplicity personified, and yeah, I'm proud of that. But that's, good programmer should be. But it's what's nice about me, or the advantage I have, is that I'm also able to sell that to the market, to the customers, and the technical side of airlines and our bigger partners, that resonates with them.
Yeah, no, certainly. So, what's also interesting, you're talking about, pitching these airlines and what resonates with them. I feel like for the last, 9 years that Mozio has been in existence, this idea of like every airline should be the Amazon of travel, is kind of like almost become a joke these days. And like, I think some, particularly like AirAsia and Ryan are guys like that do a better job than others. But I feel like you rode you mentioned it earlier, a wave of interest in ancillary revenue, from bag fees to car rentals and everything. And, tell us about that change in mindset on the airlines and how you were able to take advantage of it.
That's well noted, David. When we started, airlines were starting. EasyJet were actually, I think, the pioneer, maybe Southwest, but EasyJet certainly had built this concept of non-air ancillary. And it was clear, very clear. It hadn't arrived at the trade circuit yet, but it's very clear that airlines were starting to think about how else can we make money. Like, we have 20 million passengers a year, 30% of them are on our website with a credit card, making a $300 purchase, and all they're selling them is an unprofitable seat. So that idea of selling more stuff to the same customer base was pretty obvious, right? But then you say, okay, well, who does that really well? Well, it's obviously Amazon, right, with the recommendation engine. So you steal that halo and you bring it over and put it in your own head, and you say, we can make you be the Amazon. And that allowed us to really simplify the message to what we are to people. And that's actually just good marketing, I think, or good positioning. Like, I was on a pitch thing, a plug and play pitch just earlier on today. There's 25 companies on there, and I listened to all of them, 4-minute pitches, and I don't know what 90% of them do still. And we were able to say, we'll turn your website into the Amazon of travel by just one line of script, add every product you want, bang. Keep it simple and strong. So yeah, we certainly robbed that halo, and then Ryanair and lots of others did the same thing. But the truth is, and you and me both know this, there's still airlines do a piss poor job of monetizing their customer base, and there's still a long way to go. And to be honest with you, and Kevin, you like this one, if they don't do it, Google will. We won't talk about that.
We're inevitably going to come along to your lifelong, career-long affinity for Google, the search engine. So it's interesting because, I mean, for many people, whether they're journalists or industry people that attend conferences, you are synonymous with CarTrawler, and we're always the, I guess, the front man for it. How did that come about? Because, you were a founder, someone who came in year one, and you were the CTO, but you weren't the CEO. I mean, how did you find yourself in that role where you were always the person on stage cracking jokes, making people laugh, but being very smart at the same time about it.
So that's branding as well. I mean, so the company was really run by myself and Mike McGurty, Mike was the CEO. Mike is, very stable, genius. He's an accountant. He's prudent. He knows about structure. And he's a really, really smart guy and a good friend of mine as well. Mike and me kind of ran the business together, but we also knew that, look, if you want to sell a tech product, be tech cool, right? And Mike's not going to stand up and be tech cool. He doesn't know a computer if it hit him in the head. So I'm good at selling tech. I'm good at all of that, right? And that's part of it. It's about branding image, and your company is a personality, and it's either going to be some stupid, shitty logo that means nothing to anyone, or a person. And that person, can, and in my case, was me. But I also led the company from a strategy point of view. So it was my work on, this is what we're doing next. This is not just technically how we're going to build it, but this is not just what the customer is going to want, but this is how we're going to tell the customer that that's what they're going to want. And so I think that's important for a business to lead with, like a tech business, to lead with a tech person that's evangelizing as well as making a lot of the decisions, because it's real. But if I look at bigger companies to do that, they send out a more polished version, right? Won't curse as much, but also won't be really connected with the strategy or the product of the company. It'll be just someone that's really good at talking, right? Like the people at Google wheel out, let's call it a spade a spade. And small companies need to do better than that. So like David, you're the guy in Mozio, right? And there's lots of others that I think it's an important part of the message and the kind of personality of the company to do that. So I didn't run the company. I ran it with Mike. I'd find it very difficult to manage a large company. I don't have a structured mind. And I'm CEO of Manna now. God help Manna if I have to scale it. This isn't going out public anywhere, is it? I have investors.
No, your secret is safe with us and
right. Okay.
PhocusWire, of course.
Right. Okay.
I'm interested in also from those early years as a startup and into the kind of the 2010s as well. I mean, you're an Irish company, or CarTrawler was an Irish company, is an Irish company, and we've had probably a disproportionate, sadly, number of founders that we've spoken to on this that are from the Valley and from the US. I mean, how did you find trying to break into the travel tech world being an Irish startup?
Well, I mean, I would say the Valley.
The technology always has to speak for itself, of course, and those
yeah.
things. But there are so many other things that often count for you or count against you based on your geography, perhaps.
No, absolutely. In the case of CarTrawler, it was never an advantage because we were always profitable, so we never needed to raise money, and we bootstrapped it, and we were very quickly generating cash, so we never needed to play that Valley thing. And the other problem with the Valley is just the cost. To run an operation in the Valley is probably 5 times the cost to run the operation in Dublin, and 7 times the cost to run it in Wales, and so on. The talent pool is concentrated and good in the Valley, but tenure is terrible. And the average tenure until I left anyway, or went non-exec CarTrawler, was 7 years of our tech people. Like, we didn't lose tech people. And like, if you're a programmer, you know this story. You cannot lose programmers that wrote code, because you may as well just throw out the code. No programmer worth their salt is going to come in and maintain someone else's code. They're always going to want to be rewriting and re-architecting it. And in the Valley, you have churn. Like, you're doing well to keep someone for 18 months. In Dublin, you're keeping someone, as long as you treat them well and you give them interesting work, you're keeping them as long as you want. That makes software more resilient, and it makes your product more flexible, believe it or not. It's a funny dynamic.
No, it's interesting on that. Sorry, just a second to follow up on that one, David. I mean, it's interesting how you've kind of framed that, because you aren't the only, or CarTrawler wasn't the only up and coming tech company in Ireland anyway. I mean, Google moved there, the Facebook had stuff there. There you
Yeah.
have the data lexes and the travel tech companies like the data lexes and the box evers and all those kind of folks. So to retain the programmers and the other staff that you had, I mean, what were you doing to, as a company culture perspective, to kind of keep them there, apart from maybe paying them obscene amounts of money?
No, we didn't. I mean, like we didn't really have stock options to play with. We didn't really have a ton of cash. Like we wouldn't overpay. You just keep them happy. Like, I mean, programmers always want to work on interesting things. So certainly programmers have, you could almost calculate by age, right? You can say, right, 20-year-olds want to play with the latest SDKs and the latest version of blah, blah, blah. And 40-year-old onwards, they're quite happy so long as they get to make architecture decisions and to write the odd bit of code and mentor people. And the ones in the middle could go either way, right? And it's just like, how many, our top size, I think, was about 100 people in engineering and CarTrawler. I knew all their names. Most of the time I knew what they were working on. And a lot of the times I was fighting with them over how to build it or what to build it with and all that stuff. It's about, how impressive is it for a new programmer to come into a company and have the founder or at least someone like me going up to their desk, pushing them aside and saying, show me what you're doing and let's talk about this, and looking at the code and asking questions and getting involved. So I think that's leadership. I think I do that well with tech teams. And that's how you keep them engaged, keep them really feeling that they are responsible for the outcome. And like, as I said, I'm a programmer, not my first rodeo leading programming teams. That works. But that's really difficult to do at scale. And once you get to a certain size, that's more and more difficult to do.
So you mentioned that the thing about churn being less in Ireland, and something Mozio also realized from an early age. We've been 9 years distributed, and it's now the trendy thing to do post coronavirus. But the CarTrawler name means something in travel, but I'd say it means just as much in the Irish tech industry. And I remember, a couple of times I think I came to visit you or Datalex or something in Ireland and mentioned who I was going towards, and the cab driver knew who you guys were. And maybe, the funny thing is Mozio actually has a Irish entity technically, because you guys have done a really good job trying to recruit, foreign entities to open up offices there. And, we're one of them on paper, at least. How do you look at what the Irish tech scene has evolved like in the last, 10 years?
To be honest with you, it hasn't evolved at all. It's kind of culturally, it's the same. It's quite a sober, I realized the pun involved there, but it's actually quite a sober tech industry. We're not mad for Flash Harry, or we don't talk in Silicon Valley unicorn terms at all. It's really quite a, I won't say conservative, but but it's just basically, like, just get it done, make some cash, maybe try and sell your business, work hard, and there's not a lot of bullshit, right? Which I actually like. I'm probably the biggest bullshitter, to be honest with you. And CarTrawler is, through its scale, the biggest success, tech success, probably in Ireland and in the travel space, and possibly, at all. So we're obviously well known, and we make a bit of noise. And the reason we make a bit of noise is for hiring, right? We want to get all the best people always, so we make noise. But there's not, like, if I look at a San Francisco company like you guys coming over, I would say to any company listening to this, you should be in Ireland. You'd be better off in Ireland. Tax advantages are unbelievable if you're a foreign company. Our government do a really good, like I would say, us and the Israelis, are the leaders in the world at getting and attracting talent and indigenous and companies to come in. We're not great at fostering indigenous companies. We're getting a lot better. But it is a really, really nice environment with a ton of talent, a great place to live, and shitty weather, which is perfect for productivity.
So I wanted to actually segue the conversation to something, and this could end up being a very short answer to the question, depending on if you're allowed to talk about it or not. But to something that happened with another Irish company that used to work with Ryanair, and you guys walked away from at least part of that deal, I remember. And Ryanair is notoriously litigious, and I forget if they sued you or sued someone else. I think they sued everyone at this point, from what I understand.
I think we're actually the only company that they didn't sue, because I know where Michael O'Leary lives.
Really? There you go. Well, so
and
I
business
remember,
gets done in dark alleys in Ireland.
Yeah. So, I what I found interesting about that is you guys clearly decided to walk away from what is theoretically the biggest deal in the industry, right? And I've had my own dealings with Ryanair where they tried to get me to pay them for my product or something ridiculously topsy-turvy, with us ended up with us walking away. So I can guess half your answer, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on what goes into a decision like that. When should a startup literally go, this isn't worth it for us, we have bigger fish to fry?
Yeah. I mean, I advise a bunch of startups, and I always tell them, they all get excited about signing Ryanair, or I say, if you do that, you're dead, right? Their scale and their complexity and all of that volume does you no good, because, rightly so, Michael O'Leary leaves nothing on the table, no breadcrumbs. He has a Hoover every time you leave your office to hoover up any coins that fell out of your pocket. But that's not to say they're not a great customer, because they push your boundaries in terms of functionality, data set, and all that stuff. So, I would say we got as much out of the Ryanair deal as Ryanair did, because we got to evolve our product with the most incredible data set and functionality that we got to build and test on the fly with the biggest airline in Europe. And hats off, for me, if you're at a sufficient scale where you can take on a loss-making deal and get something out of it in terms of product development, then that's worth doing. And that would have been our view of it. And they've been one of, if not our best ever customer. And in terms of how we evolved the product, they were turbocharged customer for us. So, not for small companies, for big companies to want to really take a stretch, they're worth dealing with, I always felt. And they're also entertaining. I mean, it's a great client to have if you don't mind, getting roared at, screamed at, and all that stuff. But they were great, their tech team were the fastest airline tech team we've ever worked with. They were the most receptive to trying out things. And if we wanted to have a daily or a weekly iterative cycle on their native mobile app, they were up for that. If they thought it squeezed an extra 10 basis points, out of something, they were up for it. So that's very valuable. But then at some point, when you get to where we were at a certain scale, where you can afford to fire a customer, as they say, sometimes the marriage isn't beneficial for both parties. And if that's the case, I'm not saying that's the case with Ryanair, but if that's the case, you should always look at the impact on all levels of any particular customer. And unless it works on multiple levels, sometimes it's better either not to take that customer on, or you might need to walk away from it.
So at what point, taking it from the other direction, right? Like you said, they're one extreme in terms of hoovering up every dollar, and there's other people like Walmart has a notorious kind of bidding deal where they pressure you down, and obviously Amazon, Jeff Bezos has the saying above us, well, your margin is my opportunity or something. But at what point does it become penny wise pound foolish? Because I've sometimes seen airlines or OTAs or other people go, well, we can squeeze this little bit out, and then they scare all potential partners away who can't make any money. They build it, and then I've seen certain airlines or certain OTAs on their second or third iteration of a transfers project, like in Mozio, and it's kind of, you've probably wasted a lot of money here trying to squeeze that extra 0.1, that extra 10 basis points out of it. I don't know. Have you thought about that?
So we don't have any customers that I would say abuse us, but I would say, and like that, we have suppliers on the other side. Don't forget, we have, just like you, we have a ton of suppliers on the other side, and we squeeze them, but we don't try to make it a lose-win situation. And I think in the end, you have to be a good member of the community. Everyone has to, have a reasonable margin. And I don't agree with squeezing anything to the nth, particularly bringing in a small startup and squeezing them to the end. I don't agree with that, but you could say equally culpable would be the boards and investors in some of these small companies that are just, you know, looking at the sexiest big opportunity rather than thinking about it, you know, and all the facets of it. You know, so yeah, look, it just depends, but I certainly wouldn't take the zero margin approach. I would like to think that, you know, when I do retire, that everyone will come to my retirement party and not hate my guts. And there are certain individuals that'll be pretty fucking lonely at their retirement parties, and I don't want to be one of them.
Okay. And what I found quite interesting, having, you know, I pretty much started writing about travel tech at the same time as CarTrawler was born. So, you know, my journey in learning about the industry and the people in it is kind of mirrors its the CarTrawlers. And maybe you'll correct me on when the date was or the period was, but it was certainly probably going back 4 or 5 years where you, whether it was you personally or whether the company started talking very vociferously about Google. We referenced this a little while ago. Now, some would say that perhaps given, you know, Google is always an exit for somebody, it may well have been an exit for you. What was the thinking were you behind being so vocal about your anger about Google? Was it just frankly because you were pissed off with them? Or was it that you just, there was something else in it? Because it's a fair thing to say, Bobby, that it did suddenly kind of switch on, that you suddenly became very vocal about Google. I mean, up until November of last year, your interview with me a couple of years ago at the PhocusWire Europe conference, where you went on a right old rant about Google, was our most popular video to date. Unfortunately, was a rather interesting guy called Chamath, who I interviewed last November at the PhocusWire conference, who kind of blew you out of the water on that one. But until that moment, you were
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, he was pretty good. But back to that point though, I mean, there was a turning point where you suddenly became Mr. I'm going to talk about Google whenever I get the opportunity. Yeah,
correct. So nobody was willing to speak clearly about what Google's game was in the travel industry. None of the platforms, as in the conference platforms, everybody was giving Google a seat on the stage because, and rightly so, that sells tickets, right? You get the Google travel guys up, everyone wants to go see that, and it is always the most packed part of the event. So, but no one's challenging them. No one is questioning, what are you, Mr. Tech Giant, with your, you know, $80 to $120 billion of EBITDA doing, looking at the travel industry? What's your plan here? And I found it quite interesting, not threatening at all, but I found it quite interesting, their relationship with Expedia and Priceline. And just from a strategy point of view, I was interested in tracking that, but I was blown away by how, in fact, by the absolute vacuum of tough questions that were being asked. And then I find out that Google are screening questions and they're refusing to be interviewed in a two-way thing, and they're refusing to debate, and they're refusing to get, I just think that's super unfair. And I think they bullied the whole industry into a one-way message. And in terms of strategy, you know, it's pretty clear to me what it is. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is so obvious. And then on the other side in search, they have a monopoly. The regulators doing sweet FA about it. Meanwhile, in my view, they're poised to do some major damage to the potential for innovators to innovate. And what I mean by that is that, you know, I've started up businesses, you know, and I invest in other businesses, and I advise venture capitalists and private equity on their potential investments and their existing portfolios. And at the same time as all these things were happening, I'm noticing that investors are starting to say, well, hang on a second, why won't Google do that? That's the question I ask. So if you see a bit of innovation, they straight away go to, oh, well, why wouldn't Google do that? In other words, they think that if Google are interested in that space, it's not an investable space. And for me, that is an abuse of a monopoly position to extend market dominance into adjacent segments, which in Europe is against the law. And that is what they got fined for. But yet no one in the travel industry is challenging them. And I asked so many times to debate them on the stage or to, contribute to the questions, whatever, no way can you do that because they're so influential in the travel industry. Any B2C business is afraid of them. I know B2C businesses, as you, Kevin, that have been knocked out of business through SEO punishments that are really existential. And you have this giant on one side that wants to enter the travel industry as a vertical, and on the other side, they control the fate of anyone that's a B2C business. And luckily for CarTrawler, we're not really a B2C business, so I had nothing to lose. And then the other part of it is most of the airline executives that I would know that I work with because they're customers or for whatever reason, they want to talk about this behind closed doors, but they want to talk about it. And so therefore, selfishly speaking, I'm very happy to add my voice to that, to talk to them about it, and to help them understand it, and to maybe plot where the thing could end up. And that actually serves my needs as well, because it brings me closer to the airlines. So it's thought leadership. But yeah, I still feel very strong about it. And I think that they need a much bigger challenge from the industry. Finally, Barry Diller finally spoke up about it and said that they should be broken up. But before that, Derek Koshashawi said nothing. He congratulated them on their continued success the whole time. Mark Okerstrom behind him, the same. Never an industry challenge. And Priceline are happy to buy the customers because they're in the dominant position. So Priceline are the only ones that continue to win by Google's monopoly. Everybody else loses.
Yeah. So actually elaborating on that a little bit, Drew Patterson of JetSetter in Room 77 wrote an article about a month and a half, 2 months ago about how traditionally the OTAs benefit from recessions because small little hotels finally decide, well, I'm running out of money, better get as much traffic as possible and go sign up. And how actually this time around, it's looking like Google's going to be able to benefit over the OTAs. And I don't want to butcher his op-ed, but the theory, I think, if I'm remembering it correctly, was that it's more efficient just to directly link, and also many of these OTAs have stopped advertising needless on Google, and Google doesn't have to pay for those eyeballs. I'm curious, how do you see this playing out, over partly post-COVID, but it's also regardless of COVID over the next 5 to 10 years around these it's vertical search versus horizontal search, right? Vertical search meaning Priceline booking, and versus horizontal in Google. And do you have any hope that the vertical guys will win out, or do you without legislation actually?
I think they can thrive, but I think it's consolidation. So there's no opportunity for any small entrant, zero opportunity. And the medium guys ultimately will coalesce into bigger medium guys and ultimately either get acquired by Priceline or Expedia or whatever. But there's a world where there's direct to hotel powered by Google, which will be 60-70% of the world. And then there's a rest which will be aggregated by Priceline and Expedia. And the reason that will exist is because they do fulfillment, they do customer service, which is needed. And I think because of the fragmentation in the hotel industry, that's always going to be a need. And again, if you ask anyone in private in Google, how they view the travel industry, it's very simply, they don't believe in the value of aggregation. They don't believe unless you add value, physical value somewhere along the chain, you should be directly bypassed by Google. That's their view. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense what they're currently doing, particularly in flights, but as much in hotel too. Funnily enough, in car hire, they haven't really been that active. They may be, they should be. If I were a monopoly, I'd go into car hire. But right now they haven't. And again, there's a happy bloody conspiracy going on here between Google, Priceline, and Expedia. Everybody else loses, but so long as those guys hoover up the world. But at some point, Google are going to change the direction of the gun, and that point becomes when the margin has eroded so much, or starts to really get affected by. So in other words, the paid margin comes down so much, and loyalty disappears, which it will. What happens then? Well, as Google expands, once their market headroom, once their market penetration is saturated, and the margin within that penetration has maximized, the only way you can grow your business, and this is a business that still grows at nearly 20% annually, Like it's unbelievable. So where do you go next? Well, you bypass the intermediary and you go straight to the owner of the product, and there's a much wider margin down there. And they're already doing that, and they'll continue to do it. So for me, that story that I've been talking about for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, it hasn't changed. Still happening. Will they get broken up? Not quickly enough to save the small guys in the travel industry.
I'm glad that it was 4 or 5 years, because that's what I had it in my head, that that's how long you've been talking about it. So
yeah,
I feared that we would have very little time to kind of move on to this last little phase, and we're very conscious of everyone's time. Those that are listening on the audio, the podcast in a couple of weeks from now, behind you there is what looks essentially from the picture like a Starship Enterprise, but it's actually a drone from your new company, which is Manna. Can you just give us a sense kind of what's the thinking behind leaving what you had to go into actually being the CEO of a new company of a fairly nascent type of technology? And briefly, if you can, just talk to us about the stuff that you've been doing around the COVID, because that was particularly interesting and brilliant.
Yes. So online food is a $350 billion industry. Uber Eats, Deliveroo, Grubhub, you name it. It loses money on most transactions because the cost of bringing that product from the place to the customer is about $6.50. So it's a shitty, low margin industry that's growing like crazy and very, very large. So I at some point I came up with the idea, well, you can use drones to carry products within 2 or 3 miles of a store or a restaurant, and you can do it very cheaply. So I put a team together. I invested in myself. I built a drone, concept drone, that worked. Then I expanded it. I raised $7 million now for the business. We have now an aviation grade, real industrial drone that will carry 2 to 4 kilos at about 80 kilometers per hour. That, across a 50 square kilometer catchment area, maximum delivery time at 3 minutes, and at a cost of $1, we can carry everything from everywhere to everyone at speed in a scalable way. So like this thing is by far bigger than CarTrawler or anything I could imagine. Just the virgin space of last mile delivery is so big, and regulations are starting to open up to allow us to do this. And we're running now in Ireland, small town Ireland, 1,000 people, and we're obviously delivering convenience store and all these other things. We're also delivering prescription medicines. So you can get a video consultation with your doctor. Your doctor then can, based on that, issue a prescription electronically to the local pharmacy. The pharmacy gets that, and we fly it from the pharmacy directly to the customer, to the patient's house. And it arrives, again, within 3 minutes of being dispensed. It's a circus. It looks like a circus. It's entertaining, but it's as practical as it is entertaining. And it is, without a doubt, as crazy as it sounds, there's going to be no road-based delivery in suburban and rural areas after 5 years. It's just so much better.
It's perhaps ironic that you've gone from ground transportation into air transportation finally, after all these different iterations of your career.
We might plug it into CarTrawler and carry people around.
Watch this space, eh? Okay, we're right up against time now. So, as always, it's a pleasure for me to talk to you, Bobby, and from David and I. Thank you very much for appearing on How I Got Here and being so insightful and entertaining as always. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Nice to see you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Bobby. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This was How I Got Here. This is Mozio and PhocusWire's weekly podcast where we talk to the innovators and entrepreneurs in travel and transportation. If you've come to this randomly, you can subscribe to How I Got Here on Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, all the usual places. Leave us a review, leave us some feedback. We'd love to hear what you think. But that's all from us for now. We'll see you next time. Thanks ever so much.
Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more inside stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages, and get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.